I'm now going to transition into what happens when, just like last topic, you have a look at not just the algebra and the numbers, but can you draw me a picture? Can you have a look at some graphs? So here is an example. Let's have a look at this. This graph shows, just like we had a look at in last topic, a linear relationship here between, have a look at the axes carefully, between the time, the amount of time that you've put your money into a loan, for instance, and then on the vertical axis you can see there's the amount of interest. Okay, so these two quantities are related. You can probably guess the time, most people would say that's the independent variable. You can change that, and the amount of interest, it responds. So it's the dependent variable, okay? So now that I've got those two, let's have a look at what's being asked of us and see if we can use the graph to interpret what's going on. The graph shows the interest earned when $2,000 is invested at 4.5% simple interest. Use the graph to find. Okay, so I'm going to look carefully at what's being asked of me, and then I'm going to go over to the graph and see if I can interpret it properly. The amount of interest earned after 6 years. Okay, so I'm looking for the horizontal axis here. That's the year, the time axis. And when you have a look at this guy, my ruler here, if you go across to 6 years, which you can see just over here on the right-hand side, to work out the amount of interest, all I need to do is, as I have before, measure up from that 6 spot, like so. And you can see where it intersects with the line graph. Now, I want to read across now to the vertical axis. So again, I'm going to grab my ruler. And it looks like it very, very neatly goes straight for the graph onto that spot, which looks to be, if you zoom in really carefully, or if you look really closely at your piece of paper, it looks to be 5 boxes between 500 and 600. So if there are 5 boxes that go 100, that means that each one should be 20. And I'll just check. If that one's going to be 520, that's a bit thick. Let's try that again. Make it a little bit easier to read. This one, if it was 520, that would make this 540, 560, 580, and yes, the next one will be 600. So I got the scale right. That's a good sign. So now I look at that and I say, well, look, that line, it clearly goes off to 540. So my answer to part A rather, is that the amount of interest is going to be I equals 540, and no calculation is required. I've read that off the graph, and like we've demonstrated before, if your graph is accurate, and this one is, then that's the whole point of it. You don't have to do calculations, you just look at the picture, okay? In exactly the same way, I'm going to look at part B. It says the time taken to earn $350 interest, okay? 350, let's zoom in a little bit closer. That's going to be exactly halfway between 300 and 400, which unfortunately for us is not exactly on one of these grid lines, but I can still measure and do it pretty accurately, I think. Between 300 and 400, halfway, I think I'm going to get a line about there. That looks like where it's going. And you can see now, that's from the interest axis, and now I'm going to measure all the way down to the time axis. So I've got my vertical line here. If I draw it down and try and be as accurate as I can, the horizontal axis, because it's measuring something completely different to the vertical axis, it has a completely different scale. It's unsurprising. I still do, though, have 5 boxes between each one of the numbers, and so that looks to me like I'm going to have 0.2 for each square. And now I'm going to just try and check that to confirm. If I had the first one, 3.2, then this one will be 3.4, this one will be 3.6, this one would be 3.8, and yes, the next one would be 4 if I keep on going up. So now, having a look, it seems to me that the line I've drawn down, this line here, it's halfway between that 3.8 and 4, which looks to me like it's going to be 3.9. So, part B, the time taken to earn that amount of interest, which I've read off from here, that's where 350 would be, that's going to be N equals 3.9 years. And I'm done. Okay. So again, this is really nice. If you get a graph, you actually, and the graph is good, you minimize the number of calculations you have to do, which is a real plus.